Welcome to another episode of Buford Pusser, The Other Story. With me tonight is Dennis Hathcock. Glad to have you here again, Dennis.
Well, thank you, Mike. I'm glad to be here.
All right. Well, just to kind of do a short recap, last episode we talked about Pauline Mullins Vance Pusser. And had a little conversation about Buford along the way. We talked about him returning to, or relocating to Chicago after he was discharged from working at a local funeral home. Went up there to attend Worsham School for Mortuary Science, and he had a job up there as a die cutter at Union Bag Company, where two of his friends, Jerry Wright and Marvin King Jr., both worked. We covered about how he started working part-time at a club called the Buccaneer Club. He was employed as a wrestler and also supposedly as a bouncer for the club. He met Pauline while he was up there. Of course, she had two children, Mike and Diane. And something that we discussed last time was the fact that Pauline had another child that we'd never heard about before, Karen Felicia. And, of course, she was the daughter of Roman Pete Vance, who was also a wrestler at the Buccaneer Club. While Pauline was pregnant with Karen Felicia, Pete was supposedly or allegedly beat and physically abused Pauline to the point where whenever Karen Felicia was born, she was incapacitated both physically and mentally. And as we discussed last week, Pauline gave her up to family members for adoption. We also learned or discussed the fact that Buford met Pauline in mid to late 1959. They were married on December 5th. And it was at that time along about December 12th that Buford decides to take a trip and head back home down toward the Anna, Illinois to visit a friend. And accompanying him on that trip were Jerry Wright and Marvin King Jr. Now, ironically, that is the same time period when the Plantation Club was robbed and its proprietor, W.O. Hathcock, was almost killed during the robbery. And that's the importance of having Dennis here today, is because W.O. was his dad. And I figure that just about everybody that's remaining, Dennis probably knows about as much about that incident as anybody. At any rate, I will mention that I cover all this in my book, Buford Pusser, The Other Story. Has lots of stories about what really happened back in those days, lots of photographs, lots of documents. It's an interesting read. But at any rate, Dennis, what I wanted to ask you to start out with was, it was a Friday night when Buford, Jerry Wright, and Marvin King Jr. left the Chicago area to go to Anna, Illinois. Now, my question for you is, at the Plantation Club, which is quite a ways from Anna, Illinois, what would a weekend night have been like at the Plantation Club?
Well, their big business was on the weekend, and so on Friday nights, they always had a band, and local, or may have been some other band out of Memphis, but normally a local band.
But a big crowd.
So probably 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning. Then the same thing would happen on Saturday nights. It would stay open till 12 or 1 o'clock, have a band. And, if there were still people around, the band quit playing at 1, but they'd stay open maybe another hour or so.
Okay.
Then Daddy'd ask him to leave. It's time to close.
Well, on this particular night, Buford and his little entourage allegedly arrived there on Saturday morning. It was early on a Saturday, and they went into the club. At one point, Buford allegedly purchased a little handgun from your dad. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I know that's what, Dad said that he and the other two came in late, real late, and said they wanted to look. Daddy always traded around on some pistols and guns to everyone. They wanted to look at what he had.
Yeah.
And of course, before he did that, that was right at closing time. He asked the other people to, go on, because he said, just sit here and wait till I get everybody out of here, and then I'll show you what I've got. And
well, correct me if I'm wrong now. Actually, by trade, your dad was a watchmaker.
That's right.
He was trained in that, as opposed to necessarily being the owner of a nightclub.
That's right. And he liked to trade and buy whatever, cars and pony, whatever.
But he was pretty much familiar with anything of valuables, whether it's jewelry, watches, right, firearms, cars, whatever.
Right.
Let me ask you this. Do you think your dad would have sold a gun to Buford had he thought that Buford was a threat at that time?
I'd hope not, but I'd hope he wouldn't sell him one, but, he's not here to speak for that, but I don't believe he would.
Now, I do know that, there was a lot of question as to whether or not that Buford and Wright and King were all there. However, I know that Nita Godwin and Billy Joe Robinson later said that they saw those three in the club before they left that night. Is that correct?
That is correct. And they also had been across the street at Jack's place and then come over there. Okay. So, they were identified by them too. So,
okay. Can you tell me a little bit about the layout, just so that viewers will understand how the club actually looked, as far as the bar, the dance floor, and where the living quarters were?
Let's say you walk in the front door of the club. Right beside the door where you walked in was a petition that ran all the way across, but it had an opening right in the middle. Okay, that was to the right. Over to the left was the bar. There's probably seated 12 people, something like that, 12, 13, 14 people. But just before the bar started, the restrooms were right there, men's and women's restrooms. Then you came back, you went through the opening in the bar. That was the dance floor, and it had a lot of tables all around the dance floor. And then the jukebox was, at that time, the jukebox was straight back. One other time or two, it was over to the right one time, but
at that time, it was about as far at the opposite end of the building from the bar as it could be.
Yeah, it was. It was up against the wall, the other wall. Okay.
Okay. Now, if I recall, there was a more or less a pony wall that separated the bar and the dance floor.
Yeah, it's about head high. You could see over it, stand there and look over it, if you were average size.
Now, everybody had pretty well cleared out except for Buford, Wright, and King. And your dad had done his transaction with the little handgun, and he was trying to usher them out, if I recall correctly. He went to the jukebox to unplug it.
Yeah, yeah. He walked back to the back through that opening there, and he told him, said, "I'll be back." I think he showed him one or two pistols or whatever, and he told him he was going to walk back and turn the jukebox off. And he walked back there to the back and turned the jukebox off. And when he turned around and came back through, one of them was hiding behind the wall that was there, and that's where they hit him in the head with the. It looked like the end of the butt of a pistol, because it made like a horseshoe, made a big horseshoe place right in the top of his head, and cracked his skull. And
Okay, I'm told that when he turned around, that he could see Pusser and Wright sitting at the bar, but King wasn't visible to him.
Right.
So from that, I assume that it was King that actually hit him in the back of the head.
Right. I'm right. But I imagine, I don't imagine, I heard Debbie tell it, that he just thought he went to one of the restrooms right there beside where they were sitting, you know.
Okay, so he was kind of down below that pony wall, so that whenever W.O. walked past.
Yeah.
That kind of does away with the big stick story of Walking Tall, that Buford went in there and took on about 10 different state liners and whipped up on everybody. There wasn't a cage with a cashier in there for him to approach and allegedly get the money that was taken from him, a couple of years earlier when he was beat up.
There's never been a cage in the Plantation Club, other than a cage for a cow. I mean, for a dog or something like that, a little cage, but not a cashier's cage.
Okay, let's go on to where W.O.'s been beaten, basically knocked unconscious. Do you know anything about when he came to?
Well, you could see through the blood. I mean, he bled a lot. And he crawled through that blood up to the steps that came up and went back in the living quarters where my mother, where they lived. And we had a little old dog named Lady Ann, and that little dog is a Pomeranian. I guess she heard him trying to get up the steps, crawl up the steps, and he didn't make it. He didn't make it up the steps, but she heard it and started barking. And when she did, Mother, who had already gone to bed and gone to sleep, probably an hour and a half, 2 hours before that, came to the door and opened the door, and she saw Daddy laying there at the foot of the steps, and of course she went out there trying to help him get up and do this, and I know she told about that morning that it was real icy on the windshields, and it took forever for her to get a little old hole knocked in the ice that had formed on the windshield so she could see to take him to the hospital. They called Dr. Frank Davis, and he said he'd be there to meet Mother. That's who had always been their doctor and everything. And
what kind of injuries did W.O. have?
Well, like I said, he cracked his skull, gave him and he had a place almost perfect shape of the butt of a pistol right in the top of his head. And then he's back. I guess it was, I don't know, I'm just saying, I don't know who, somebody had stomped his back and stomped his neck and crushed those vertebrae in his neck. And they had tied him up with a cord off of a light fixture that hung down. They broke the cord and tied his hands up and left him there in that blood. And he's a big male. Because they called up at my grandmother's. I was staying at my grandmother's for the weekend. And I know they took me down there and went in, and there's a huge puddle of blood, and you could see where he'd been crawling in the blood.
Well, how long was he in the hospital?
About 2 weeks.
Okay.
I believe I'm right about that. About 2 weeks.
Now, I've been told that, of course, that when the incident was reported, that a constable and he was also a court bailiff, Cleveland Marler, was the one that went out to investigate it, and that he found a handkerchief with a laundry marker on it that was tied the incident back to Chicago and thereby back to Buford and Wright or King. But I also heard that, and I don't know if this is true, this is just one of those things that you pick up as you research, that there was a member of the Pusser family that may have confirmed that Buford was actually there.
No, that member actually is who gave him a picture of Pusser.
Okay.
For him to take and show to Daddy to identify him.
Yeah, I know that basically they were doing a lineup there at the hospital. Since your dad couldn't get out, they were bringing people to the hospital for him to try and identify. I interviewed one of the people that went through that and said he'd been working on the pipeline and came back home. It was getting near Christmas time, so on and so forth, and that he got picked up, taken to the hospital, and that when W.O. saw him, he reached out, shook his hand, and told the individual that he had nothing to do with any of this. So at any rate, I'm told that they, after they kind of narrowed it down to Buford and his buddies, that Sheriff Hilly Coleman of Alcorn County and his brother L.W. Coleman went up to Chicago, where Chicago police had already arrested Buford and were holding him, and they brought him back to Alcorn County. Do you know why that Buford might have had it in for W.O.?
Well, you've heard me say, I've said and heard him, 2 or 3 people ask that same question to him, and he'd always say, I'll swear I have no idea why that so-and-so hated me. He said, I never done nothing to him in my life. I've never even seen him before till that night.
Huh. Well, like I say, it's pretty clear that things didn't happen the way that we saw them in the Walking Tall movies, that was something that was pretty much for entertainment purposes only, didn't reflect the real story in any way. Walking Tall really got things out of kilter as far as a real story.
Right.
People believed that version to be true. They believed it almost like it as if it was a documentary. And
Right.
between Walking Tall and all the Facebook fan pages that are out there that disseminate a lot of phony information, it's hard to get the true story really out there. Go ahead. Do you have anything else that you'd like to offer here?
Well, no, I mean, I understand people saw the movie. I saw it. I've seen it a couple of times, but anyway, and I understand in those days, in those times, people, that gave them a hero to look up to. And although everything was a big tale and exaggerated, I understand they liked the movie. But the problem is they had no idea that it was strictly a made-up movie. And they thought it was, like you say, actual facts.
It hurted a lot of good people the way that they did it, because the story was just told so incorrectly. I think you'd agree there's no heroes in this story.
No.
I mean, what went on at the state line, it was a violation of the law,
That's right.
a lot of it, but you expect law enforcement to do a lot better.
Right.
What?
Well, I hear people talk, it's awful about how they sold whiskey down there. They sold nothing but bonded whiskey. And it was nothing but I believe it was a $50 fine.
Yeah.
And nowadays that whiskey's legal everywhere down there. They do the same thing, but there's no fine for it.
Well, like in Walking Tall, they showed them making moonshine and all this and that. And, most of those clubs that were legitimate, they wouldn't touch that stuff because that was a violation of federal law.
It's a federal law.
And a lot of people don't understand that. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I mean, for anybody that's listening, as far as your book that you've written, I've read it. It's probably the most factual, closest to the real, true story, what actually happened, of anything that's ever thought about being written about it. So,
well, I thank you for that. Dennis, I would like to have you back again next episode, because we're actually going to be talking about the trial that Buford went through for what happened there at the state line. If you could do that for us.
And another thing I would like to say is, they talk about, well, I was a kid. I may have been a kid when that happened to Dad, but it's etched. It's etched in my mind. I can see the blood and everything just like it was. And I was there when Cleveland Martyr found the handkerchief, because the mother had come back to the place to let them in to look. And I was there when he picked it up and said, "Look at this," showed it to Mother. And there was I remember a little tag that was on it. That's what they linked to Chicago, Oh.
Well, again, I've got a book, Buford Pusser, The Other Story, that tells, and the reason we call it The Other Story is because it is a different story than is told by Walking Tall. And we also have the video channel. It's named the same thing, Buford Pusser, The Other Story. We intend to do one of these episodes about every week, week and a half, until we've gone through the entire story, which actually is going to take some time. And then, of course, we've got a Facebook page where we talk on there daily about the state line and Buford, and we learn a lot. We have people come on there that, remember things from back in those days. They share what they can. I share what I can. We'd encourage people to follow that page. And I would remind everybody that if you would like to get notifications of when we have new episodes come out, just go down to the bottom right-hand side of the screen, click on the subscribe button, and that way you'll be notified whenever one of these comes out. Again, Dennis, I appreciate you being here and taking the time to discuss this with us. And with that being said, I guess it's time to get off here, and just like to remind everybody that we're trying to tell the true story because the truth has no agenda. So, Dennis, thanks for being here.
And thank you very much, Mike.
All right. You have a good one.
All right.